Welcome everyone. My name is Rifat Sabir Mansoor, and today I'm going to present on our research exploring the bug investigation techniques of intermediate student programmers. Testing and debugging are essential steps in the software engineering process. Research shows that up to 75% of the total development is spent on testing and debugging. Studies show that programmers use different techniques for testing and debugging. This depends on programmers' prior knowledge, ability, and personal preferences. Research also suggests that there is difference in how expert and novice programmers approach testing and debugging. Moreover, there are imperfect testing and debugging practices that can affect the total time on a software development effort. Finally, most of the research conducted on testing and debugging practices are directed towards novice student programmers. In our research, we explore the extent to which the student programmers use different testing and debugging techniques. We focused on intermediate student programmers who are mostly in their junior and senior year of their CS course. This group of students is a good bridge between novice student programmers and industry-level professional programmers. We focused on post-CS2 level data structures and algorithms course at our university, also known as CS 3114. The course requires to develop 4 large projects in Java language with little to no scaffolding code to start with. We identified different testing and debugging techniques in the student programmers taking this course. We refer to the whole process of testing and debugging as bug investigation. We then explored the effects of different techniques on project performance, such as project score and time spent on the project. For our research, we used a mixed methods approach of both qualitative and quantitative research. First, we conducted semi-structured interviews based on our prior knowledge, intuition, and literature review on how students practice testing and debugging during their course assignments. We developed 4 hypotheses based on the interview findings. Then we conducted online surveys to verify if our findings from the interview reflect the behavior of a wider population. Finally, we used these findings to drive larger scale quantitative analysis of usage logs from students' IDs and their submissions to an online autograder tool. For our semi-structured interview, we interviewed a total of 12 students. They were all taking the course in the fall 2019 semester. We conducted the interviews after the students have completed the first of the 4 projects of the course. Our interviewed students had a range of performance on the first project. 7 out of these 12 students scored 100, whereas the remaining 5 students scored less than 90, which is less than the median score of the first project for that semester. We asked different questions regarding the difficulty of the project, the different bug investigation techniques they used, what was the primary bug investigation techniques that they used, did they use a single technique or a combination of multiple techniques, and their reflection on different bug investigation techniques. We used the grounded theory approach to analyze the interviews. We found that the students mainly used 5 bug investigation techniques, such as diagnostic print statement, in short DPS. A diagnostic print statement is a temporary printed output that a student uses for testing and/or debugging. All of our interviewees used diagnostic print statement to some extent, and 7 students used it as their primary tool for bug investigation. Then we have JUnit testing as our second most popular tool, which is the unit testing framework for Java. Students were graded on how well their JUnit test suite performed. Therefore, some students used them only as a course requirement. Others used it for testing and/or debugging. We focused on the students who used it for bug investigation techniques and purposes. Then we have source level debugger. We found that a good number of students also used the source level debugger for bug investigation. Students also mentioned that they used the WebCat, which is an online autograder. The primary purpose of an online autograder is to check and verify students' solution code against instructors' hidden reference test cases. Some of our interviewees mentioned that they tested and debugged their code by submitting to the WebCat autograder and getting feedback in the form of pass or fail test cases. Finally, some of our interviewees used manual tracing with pen and paper and whiteboard. Since we don't have any ways of measuring this technique in our case, we focused on the other 4 techniques for our research. We also found a fair number of our interviewees used a combination of multiple techniques, both occasionally and as their primary bug investigation tool. The analysis of the interviews led us to 4 hypotheses. The first hypothesis: the majority of the students use diagnostic print statements for bug investigation. The second hypothesis: students use a combination of multiple techniques for bug investigation. Third hypothesis: students who use multiple techniques tend to perform better. Fourth, and our final hypothesis: some students use ineffective practices for bug investigation. To see if our interview findings is reflected in a wider population, we devised a 5 to 10 minutes long online survey. The survey was conducted during 2 semesters. We collected 67 responses from a total of 247 students from these 2 semesters. The surveys were both voluntary and anonymous. According to our survey, we found that 87% of the students used diagnostic print statements. This is closely followed by 85% of the students using JUnit testing for bug investigation purposes. We also have 73%, 65%, and 50% of students using source level debugger, the WebCat, and manual tracing, respectively. So this matches our first hypothesis that the majority of the students use diagnostic print statement for bug investigation. For our larger scale quantitative analysis, we collected student usage logs from different sources. Students primarily used the Eclipse IDE during the semester. We devised a rule-based classifier, which we used it on students' incremental code snapshots to classify diagnostic print statements. Using the Eclipse plugin Dev Event Tracker, we collected the students' development event data from their local machines. Finally, we collected and analyzed all the submissions made toward the WebCat online autograder. Combining all the data, we found the proportion of students using different bug investigation techniques. We found that a good proportion of students used a combination of 2 or 3 techniques. Therefore, we can verify our second hypothesis that students use a combination of multiple techniques for bug investigation. From our development process data, we found that 92% of the students use GeoNet, which is higher than 87% of the students using diagnostic print statements. However, from our interview and survey results, we learned that only 84% of the students used GeoNet testing for bug investigation purposes. The remaining 16% only used it as a course requirement. So this brings down the number of students using GeoNet testing for bug investigation purposes to 77%. So we can verify with our first hypothesis again that the majority of the students use diagnostic print statements for bug investigation. Then we try to find the effects of using a single technique versus a combination of multiple techniques on the project score. We found that students using a combination of multiple techniques had a mean score of 84%, whereas students using only a single technique had a mean score of 64%. Using Welch 2-sample t-test, we found that there is significant differences in project scores between these two groups. So we can verify our third hypothesis that students who use multiple techniques tend to perform better. Then we focused on the effect of different techniques on the time spent on projects. We found that the number of submissions to the WebCat autograder appears to have a positive correlation with the project activity time. We categorized the WebCat submissions into 2 groups. First, verifying new lines of code. The second, for bug investigation. We identified a pattern where students make multiple submissions to the WebCat with little to no improvement to the project score. In such cases, students use the WebCat autograder as a way to test their solution code by adopting trial and error approach. We identified this behavior as stagnant WebCat submission. We found that making WebCat submissions without using additional techniques such as diagnostic print statement, source level debugger, and or GeoNet testing give rise to more number of stagnant WebCat submissions. We also found that these stagnant WebCat submissions tend to increase the time spent to complete the project. So we can verify that some students use ineffective practices for bug investigation. For our future work, we hope to develop a metric to quantify the level of use for different bug investigation techniques so that we can identify ineffective practices, so that we can provide positive feedback to encourage students on improving their testing and debugging skills. We also hope to discourage students who use ineffective practices by giving them negative feedbacks. Thank you all. That was my presentation. If you have any question, feel free to reach out to any of the authors in any of those contexts listed there. Again, thank you for listening to the end.